The men assigned to die for Emperor Pertinax killed him instead. Then, before his blood dried on the palace floor, they locked themselves inside their camp and put the Roman Empire up for sale. On the Palatine, the air would have changed first. Not the shouting, not the boots, the feeling. Flavia Titiana, wife of Pertinax, knew enough about Rome to understand what that feeling meant. Cassius Dio says she ran to her husband and warned him that the soldiers were coming, not senators, not foreign enemies, it's his own guard. The men paid to stand between the emperor and death were climbing the hill with drawn swords, and the palace was no longer a residence. It was a trap. That polished textbook version skips the private disaster. Pertinax ruled for only 87 days and 193. He tried to restore discipline after Commodus, angered the Praetorian Guard. They murdered him. Then they auctioned the throne to Didius Julianus. Most histories keep moving, names, dates, succession, but inside that summary is the part Rome preferred to leave in shadow. An emperor dies inside his own palace. His wife is still there. His children are suddenly exposed. The guard holds the gates. The city hesitates. For a few terrible hours, power belongs to armed men who know they have crossed a line they can never uncross. The real horror is not only the killing, it is the efficiency that follows. Rodian says the Praetorians hated Pertinax because he tried to force them back into order. Under Commodus, they had grown used to arrogance, easy money, indulgence, the swagger of men who believed discipline was for other soldiers. Pertinax took that personally dangerous habit and tried to cut it out. Cassius Dio says he would not let them plunder, would not let palace corruption spill everywhere. He expected restraint, duty limits. To the guard, that was not reform. That was robbery. That is how murder ripens in Imperial Rome, not from one insult, from a narrowing future. Soldiers began to fear that privilege was ending and punishment was coming next. Cassius Dio points to the poison added by the Praetorian prefect Latesse, whose maneuvering deepened their panic. Men started thinking they were not just losing luxuries, they might soon lose their lives. On the 28th of March, around 200 soldiers moved on the palace. Pertinax could have hidden. He could have barred doors. Rodian says advisors urged him to choose safety. He refused. Cassius Dio says he went out to meet the soldiers, hoping the sight of the emperor and the sound of his voice would shame them back into obedience. For a moment, it almost worked. Dio describes some of them lowering their eyes and pushing their swords back toward their scabbards. Then one man lunged. One blow, then the rest followed. No heroic duel. No noble ending. A rush. A collapse. Clectus died defending him. The emperor's head was cut off and lifted on a spear. That detail matters. The head on the spear was not just cruelty, it was announcement. It told the city that one order had ended and another was already forcing itself into place. And somewhere behind that public signal stood Flavia Titiana. This is where the record thins in a suspicious way. Ancient writers love the bloody center of a coup. They become vague around the women standing beside it. We know Flavia was close enough to warn her husband. We know Pertinax had earlier refused to wrap his family too tightly into imperial theater. Dio says he did not want his wife made Augusta, and he did not want his son made Caesar. He had even arranged for his children to live with their grandfather, Flavius Sulpicianus, instead of growing up inside the palace full-time. That choice may have looked chilly in calmer days. In a coup, it looked like protection, because once the guard killed Pertinax, they needed containment more than spectacle. They ran back to the camp. Rodian says they shut the gates, manned the towers, and waited for a furious city to strike back. Rome raged, then Rome hesitated, then Rome went quiet. No counterforce stormed the barracks. No avenger arrived in time. The guard had committed regicide and discovered that the capital still belonged to whoever controlled the nearest concentrated violence. Now think about what that means for the widow. Her husband is dead. The men who killed him are armed, organized, and frightened enough to be reckless. Her father is urban prefect, but office without soldiers is paper. Her children are not in the palace, which may save them. She herself is a living link to the murdered emperor, a focal point, a possible banner for revenge, in palace politics that makes her valuable and dangerous at once. Herodian gives one brutal clue. When Sulpicianus came to bargain for the throne, the Praetorians rejected him because he was kin to Pertinax through his daughter. They feared vengeance. Blood relation was not sentimental, it was strategic. So what did the Praetorian Guard do to the emperor's widow? First, they isolated her by seizing the world around her. They held the camp, they held the succession, they held the money. They made immediate family revenge impossible, and they did something even colder. They turned the death of Pertinax into a market transaction. The same men who had just killed the emperor invited bidders. Didius Julianus and Sulpicianus competed while the guard listened from behind walls. The empire became a price shouted upward to armed brokers. Sulpicianus had one fatal problem. He was too close to the dead man's household. Julianus sounded safer. Safer for the killers. So the throne moved away from Flavia's side of the family. They did not need to drag her through the streets to ruin her position. They only had to make sure the next emperor did not come from her house. That is Roman brutality in one of its purest forms. Clean, administrative, measured. The Historia Augusta. A source that must be handled carefully says Pertinax was survived by his wife, a son, and a daughter. That sounds almost gentle. Survived. Such a polished little word. It can hide anything. It can mean they were not killed at once. It can mean they were allowed to breathe after losing everything that made breathing secure. It can mean a woman passed overnight from standing near the center of power to becoming politically untouchable in the worst possible way, too insignificant to honor, too dangerous to trust. And still, one decision made before the murder may have saved lives. Pertinax kept his children with their grandfather instead of letting them become constant fixtures on the Palatine. In ordinary times, that made the dynasty look weak. In crisis, weakness became cover. The guard could not instantly sweep up the whole family in one stroke. That is the human scale lost in grand Roman narratives. Not only who wore purple next, but who made it through the next sunset. The aftermath suggests Flavia was processed rather than publicly destroyed. Pertinax was later deified under Septimius Severus. His son, according to the Historia Augusta, even served in the cult of his deified father. So the family was not annihilated, it was repositioned. It's converted from danger into memory. Safe enough to display. It's managed to threaten anyone. And that containment is the answer most people do not expect. The Praetorian Guard did not merely menace the widow of Pertinax, they neutralized a household. They blocked the revenge route through her father. They pushed the throne toward a bidder who felt less likely to punish them tomorrow. They relied on confusion, speed, and armed proximity to make sure grief never had time to become action. Later historians helped them by compressing the entire catastrophe into a constitutional crisis. That summary is a lie of tone. The crisis was constitutional, yes, but it was also domestic, intimate, and immediate. A wife runs in to warn her husband. He walks out to face the men coming for him. He is cut down. His head rises on a spear. His family's value changes by the minute. While Rome decides whether to rage or bargain, the widow is already being sorted into categories: useful, risky, ceremonial, disposable. The final insult is how little survives in her own voice. No speech, no letter. No scene of private mourning preserved in detail. The literature remembers the bids, the donatives, the names of ambitious men, and the mechanics of succession. The widow is left at the edge of the frame. Yet a small contradiction survives in metal. Rare coins still bear Flavia Titiana's name and image from that brief season in 193. The prose shrinks her. The coinage insists she stood at the level of rule. So when someone asks what the guard did to the widow, the answer is merciless. They did not threaten her body alone. They made sure her grief could never challenge their victory.